The Andy Pollin Show.
We got to go after this with everything we got, figuring they're going to come with everything they got.
I'll start off by saying I'm bored, I'm broke, and I'm back.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630 starts right now.
Not every day on this show do we get a Hall of Fame basketball coach to come on, but very fortunate today to have Gary Williams coming up at 10:20. A lot of things to talk to him about, not just this tournament, but tournaments of the past. And he was in attendance 59 years ago tonight when what has been called the Brown versus Board of Education game took place at Cole Fieldhouse. As Gary tells it, he and a couple of his teammates from Maryland snuck in. They knew the back door at Cole in those days. And they saw a game which, in retrospect, is incredibly historic. But I think the most amazing thing about it is when you look back 59 years ago, the fact that it was an all-black starting five beating an all-white Kentucky team has picked up major significance since then. It tells you a lot about how the culture was at that time. But among other things, Frank DeFord, who covered the game for Sports Illustrated, did not mention the race factor at all. And then 40 years later, they made a movie about it called Glory Road, which took some liberties. They had a black starting five all year long. Dwayne Haskins did not say the night of the championship game, we're going to start five black players to make a statement. No, his top five players were all black, just happened to be that way. And I've got some audio from Haskins from a number of years ago talking about this. And, it was like these were two basketball teams. Everybody knew Kentucky because Adolph Rupp had one of the premier programs in America. He won a bunch of national titles. But he thought he had a better team, and they had a bigger team, and each team had only one loss. Kentucky was ranked number one in the country. Then Texas Western, it's now called University of Texas El Paso, they were ranked 3, and they'd lost only one game. So it's very interesting to look back on this 59 years ago and realize how important the game was, but how the significance of it was not really realized until many years later. I mean, we don't usually have events like that, but that's what happened 59 years ago tonight. So I'm anxious to talk to Gary about that and other things and good stories that he has from his days coaching at Maryland, Hall of Fame coaching career, back-to-back Final Fours, winning the national championship in 2002. And one of the players that he had to help things get turned around after the disaster of Bob Wade, remember that Lefty Driesell was forced out after the Len Bias death, and the chancellor was John Slaughter. Now, there was a story that circulated for years, which John Thompson denied, that Slaughter called him and said, who should I hire as a coach? And Thompson said, Bob Wade. I don't know why, actually, Thompson would have said that, because Wade and Dunbar was a great pipeline for his program. He got players out of there, and I don't know if he wanted to cut that off. And whether or not they talked about Wade or not, John said for years when this story would come out, no, I didn't do that. But as has been reported, Slaughter wanted to hire a black coach, and Wade was one of the premier high school coaches in the country. As it turned out, he was in over his head. He'd never coached in college before, and the NCAA dropped the hammer on Maryland for what was really a minor thing. It's crazy to look back on this, but he gave Rudy Archer a ride to class, which was called an improper benefit at the time. And when the NCAA came in to investigate, instead of coming clean, he lied about it. And once they found out he lied, then by the time Gary took over, and Wade wasn't fired for that. He was fired for winning only 9 games in his last year. When Gary took over, and he had a pretty good team his first year, I think they made the tournament. But then he found out that the sanctions were coming, no TV, no postseason play, and players were allowed to leave and not have to sit out a year. Just like it is now, you can go to another school. And to this day, Gary credits Walt Williams for saying that, nope, I committed to Maryland. I don't care. I'm going to stay here. And he did, giving up a chance to play in the NCAA tournament. And look, Georgetown wanted him bad. He could have played with Mourning and Mutombo and probably won a national title. But Gary has always been loyal to him, and as he stayed loyal to Gary in Maryland and staying there. So we may get into that and some other things. But one of the guys who really helped to turn things around after this incredible penalty from the NCAA was the recruiting class that included Dwayne Simpkins. And Simpkins hit the shot, which if you look back as to how Maryland emerged from this terrible period, he hit the overtime shot to beat Georgetown in a Thanksgiving weekend game in 1993. That was an historic game. Thompson would refuse to play Maryland, but Russ Potts, who was a big-time promoter, managed to put this together on Friday after Thanksgiving at the old Capitol Center, and Georgetown was heavily favored. They had been a tournament team every year, and Maryland won the game. And they had a guy by the name of Keith Booth, who was their top recruit, one of the top recruits in the country, and a guy who wasn't as well known but turned out to be the best player in the country a year later, Joe Smith, and Maryland won that game. Now Simpkins is the head coach at AU, and he's done a terrific job there. He took over last year, and this year they're in the NCAA tournament for the first time since 2014. And at his news conference yesterday in Dayton, he opened this way.
So happy for my guys, in particular the seniors. I got choked up about 2 months ago. We were, post-practice, and we get in our circle, and we try to recap whatever happened that day. And I didn't feel that we were playing with the type of urgency and effort that we needed to win a championship. And I told them how much and how bad I wanted it for them. I know how much they've been through. So to see them get a chance to experience this, this is priceless for me as a coach. And what it means for AU in general, it means a lot. Anytime, we're going to be one of 2 games on national TV tomorrow in college basketball. And for millions and millions of people to see American on our jerseys, I hope to have a good performance and obviously win, but make people say, hey, what's this American about? And Google it and go to our school webpage. And, they may talk to their niece and say, hey, I know you're applying for different schools. You may want to look at American and garner interest from a lot of people because we have a tremendous university. We have a tremendous where it's located, Washington, D.C. I'm biased, I'm a DMV guy. But the people in the community that make up our school is unlike any other that I've been around in college basketball, and I've been around for a while. So I just want everybody to get a chance to experience the greatness of our school, American University.
That's a great point about what athletics do for the school. Donna Shalala, when she took over at the University of Wisconsin as the chancellor, she said, we're going to build a great university by having a great football team. And a lot of people looked around, what? It's true. Like when Maryland went to back-to-back Final Fours, the admissions shot up. And Maryland at one time, back when I was in high school, you could sign up in the high school cafeteria, and if you had a C average, you went there. That's the way it was. It ain't that way anymore, I can tell you that. And so this would be key for the university to get this kind of exposure, especially if they win tonight against Mount St. Mary's and then match up against Duke on Friday. So that's also a part of the picture. And he's also proven to be a very good recruiter, not just the players he's bringing in, but the players he's keeping. And they have a player named Matt Rogers. He's their best player. He's 6'9". He can shoot. And the way things work in college basketball these days, just like Maryland's point guard played at Belmont last year, you're pulling guys out of smaller schools and going to big schools. And there were offers for Rogers to go to some of these top programs in the country. And he elected to stay for less money at AU. I'm sure he got some. And in fact, there's a terrific column by Candace Buckner in the Post today about how Simpkins convinced him to stay. And you'll hear some of this here, but also that he gave him free parking, which made me laugh because when I was at AU, parking was $35 a semester. So I'm sure it's more now, but it ain't the $8 million that supposedly Cooper Flagg is getting at Duke, along with the NIL money and the advertising money. He's got a shoe deal and all kinds of things. But this was Simpkins on how he was able to convince Rogers without the bucks that he was being offered by the big schools to stay for another year at AU.
Don't surrender. Don't take these short-term riches, so to speak. You have a school community that has embraced you. You have a school network that is going to take you well beyond basketball. It's going to be here for the next 30, 40 years. And you got a chance to hang a banner. You have a legitimate chance to hang a banner. He knew what role that he had here. So, and he also didn't want to disappoint his teammates that he's been here with for 4 years. So all those things combined, man, allowed us to have be able to keep Matt Rogers. If Matt Rogers isn't here, quite honestly, I'm probably not here, right?
And the question is, how long is Dwayne Simpkins going to be at AU? Another appearance in the NCAA tournament next year, or maybe even he gets offers this year. Who knows? But he's done a wonderful job there in just 2 years. And look, he had a pretty good background. His high school coach, Hall of Fame, Morgan Wooten. College coach, Gary Williams, Hall of Fame. We'll talk to him in just over an hour and a lot more on the tournament coming up. But there is some football to yak about. And yesterday they had a bunch of news conferences in Ashburn to introduce some of the new players who have signed here either as free agents or come back signing a second contract. And one of them is Noah Brown. And remember, Noah Brown didn't get here until just before the season started. Don't know why, but Houston released him. They were in need of a wide receiver. This was, I think it was after Jahan Doxson had been traded to Philadelphia. And they had some De'Ami Brown. They had some receivers, but they were looking for a number 2 guy. And Brown stepped right into that role and made the play that probably launched the season. The Hail Mary against the Bears. And he was asked, of course, about that yesterday.
It's obviously a play that made some history. And, I'm thankful to be a part of it. It's not something that I necessarily look back on too often. But, I realize the effect that it had on, the community, the team, and history and stuff like that. But, I'm just looking forward to going out there and make some more memories.
Yeah, so he will be, I guess, the number 3 receiver on the team. But that gives him, some depth. And his more credit to them as well because he was such a big part of their offense and got hurt in I think it was the Thanksgiving game, Thanksgiving weekend game against Tennessee. So they went the home stretch without him and into the playoffs, and still, that was what they did with a great quarterback, great young quarterback, and a good offense with Cliff Kingsbury. They were able to plug in for him, but they hope for a healthy year from Brown, who's back. I think it's just a 1-year deal. And then this is fun. I don't think anybody has ever done a news conference with Nick Bellore. Nick Bellore, special teams guy. He's been in the league a long time. He came in 2011, so he's played, 15 years, and he's now getting ready for one more. And he's listed as a linebacker, but has never started a game at linebacker, and he's played for the Jets, and he's played for the 49ers, played for the Seahawks. That's where this staff got to know him. And in terms of, whether or not he was going to play here this year.
It was a no-brainer. Just first and foremost, it was like the most fun year I've ever had playing football, which obviously I've kind of done it for a while now. So it was I've seen a lot of seasons come and go. And basically just like the culture here, the coaches, players from top down, it's a great place to play. And I think it's a destination that guys want to come now from all over the league. And I enjoyed my time and how they treated me here, and I couldn't ask for a better place.
We've heard that so much that this is now a destination that it's hard to look at it now and go, wow, look at that, because everybody says it all the time. But realize where this team was 1 year ago. 1 year ago, they signed a bunch of, B-level free agents and, guys who they hoped would have one more year, which they did, like guys like Zach Ertz and Bobby Johnson, Bobby the linebacker. They got guys to come here, thinking that hopefully we can build something here, and it's now to the point where, as you hear him say, guys around the league, and I'm sure over the course of his 15-year career, he's met everybody. It's a destination. It's where they want to go. It's hard to get your head around that happened that quickly. And then one more from Bellore. He's in his mid-30s, and the clock is ticking. But he's got young kids, and this is it's funny to hear this. It's part of the motivation. Not that, if somebody wants you in the NFL, you're going to make more money and have a lot more fun than you are sitting behind a desk, for sure. But this is driving him to keep playing.
I'm obviously ancient, and my son's only 4, so it's like I want to play long enough that he'll possibly remember me playing, because there's no way he would ever believe I played in the NFL probably in 10 years from now. So that would push me to about, 37. So I think he'll be about 5 or 6. So I think that's enough time that he'll actually believe that I played in the NFL. That was pretty much the main reason.
I mean, you tell your kid, yeah, I played in the NFL. Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. Of course, now, if you say to your kid, I played in the NFL, there's enough stuff on YouTube. I bet if you Googled up Nick Bellore on YouTube, you'd find some highlight plays. It's a lot different. Sometimes kids would find out later, like they'd be digging through the attic and they'd find some old pictures of dad playing college football, or sometimes even a cup of coffee in the NFL, and it's you're like, oh really, you played. So he wants to have him remember seeing him on the field. 5 he might. 6 he probably would. I have memories of 6, so that's cool. Bob Long, by the way, just passed away. Bob Long was in his 80s. If you don't remember Bob Long, he was a terrific receiver with the Packers and came here for 1 year with Vince Lombardi. Lombardi brought several of his former players here when he got here in 1969, and Bob Long was one of them. And he had a few receptions. They had Charlie Taylor then, and Jerry Smith was a great pass-catching tight end. But Bob Long had a couple of moments here, and I think he was 82 or 83, passing away the other day. All right, some more on the tournament. Seth Davis, part of the CBS crew on the Dan Patrick Show yesterday. What he has to say about something that actually the late John Feinstein wanted to do, and that was to be in the room for the selection committee. Never got the chance to do it, but as we've had all this carping, including a news conference by the governor of West Virginia to ask for an investigation, what about transparency? You'll hear what Seth Davis has to say about that as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
Hall of Famer Gary Williams in about an hour. Coming up shortly, we'll take a look back at 59 years ago today at a game that Gary was actually at. It was Texas Western beating Kentucky for the 1966 National Championship at Cole Fieldhouse, and the historical significance of that today is huge. Back then, not so much, and we'll fill you in on that coming up shortly. But this was yesterday. Seth Davis, part of the CBS group that does the pre- and the post-game stuff for the NCAA tournament. He's covered college basketball for years. And Dan asked a question which was very timely in light of what happened the other day with this idiot governor of West Virginia, Patrick Morrissey, asking for an investigation after West Virginia got left out of the tournament. Now, two things kind of smacked him in the face yesterday. One, North Carolina, which got in, beat the hell out of San Diego State, and they may have a chance against Ole Miss on Friday, or Thursday, actually tomorrow. And then also his coach, DeVries, left. He's now the coach at Indiana. So here's this dopey governor calling for an investigation, and his team doesn't even have a coach anymore, and the team that got in ahead of him beat the crap out of a team that was in the Final Four 2 years ago. But with all of this complaining about who got in and whether it was fair or not, because the head of the committee, Bubba Cunningham, is the athletic director at North Carolina, yada, 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 Dan asked Seth Davis, well, what about transparency? Couldn't you actually have a camera in the room where they make these selections, the selections for the field of now 68? I remember the late John Feinstein attempting to get in the room. He said, look, I won't write a column about it. I won't report on it. I'd just like to use it later in a book. They wouldn't let him do it. They wouldn't let him in the room. And John didn't take no lightly. He didn't like no, but that's what they stood with. Davis, this is his take on the idea of making this process more transparent.
No matter what happens, when that bracket comes out, people are going to be pissed, and some opportunistic governor is going to do whatever he does, and everyone's going to get on social media. Everybody's going to be pissed no matter what happens. I got half my timeline criticizing me for fawning over the committee and Bubba Cunningham when I asked him the question on the selection show. And the other half thinks that I am totally unfair, Duke hack, who set him up for an unfair question. It's just the nature of the zeitgeist. This happened with the college football playoff when Alabama didn't get in. So I think the basketball committee, I think the football is way behind on this, and I understand this is the first year that they've done this. The basketball committee and the NCAA in general has been extremely transparent about the process. Why do you think there are 250 or 500 bracketologists out there all using the numbers? Everything is out there. At the end of the day, it becomes very subjective. You get 7 teams for 3 spots, right? That's the math. And so I've actually, frankly, talked to them about putting a pool reporter in the room so they can report on the person in the room can report on that, at least maybe for the bracketing, because everybody has a million conspiracies. Oh, they obviously they just want to set up Patino and Calipari. They used to, and they haven't done this in a while, Dan, they actually used to do a mock selection where they bring in members of the media, such as myself, put them in the actual committee room on the actual committee computers and have them go through, a truncated process so we all understand what the process is. At the end of the day, I get the argument that, hey, these are big decisions and we want people to be able to speak freely. And if there's a camera in the room, they can't speak freely and have a real candid discussion about things. It's a very difficult position to be in because they're subject to such criticism. So look, I disagree with the North Carolina decision. By the way, go to all these bracketologists who are up in arms. All of them had Carolina in their first four out. Many of them had Carolina as their first team out or their second team out. And every year there is a team that comes sort of from further down the list, but people don't expect to be in. It's a little unfortunate that this year that team happened to be the school where not just someone on the committee, but the actual chair of the committee is the AD from that school, and he's got an incentive in his contract. It's all Bubba mice, Dan. I disagree, but that doesn't make it corrupt.
Yeah, I just, there's so much money at stake. There's jobs at stake. I want to make sure they get it right. It's just like the college football playoffs. I want to make sure they get it right.
Wouldn't you agree, though, that there is no right at the end of the day? It's otherwise the better answer, Dan, would be let's not have any human beings do it. Let's have an algorithm and let's plug in the numbers and let's let the AI computer or whatever, we'll use your image, AI generated but why even have people in the room? It's subjective. You're going to get what the football went from 4 to 12. That means whoever's 13 is going to be mad. It's just math.
Yeah, okay, so why don't we do that? Or why don't we let Vegas decide who are the teams that should be in?
There's a case for that. Listen, I've made the case, and I'll give Joe Lunardi credit for being one of the first to really say this. People talk about the eye test. I don't think there should be an eye test. Oh, look at them. They both, like UC Irvine and UC San Diego. Look at this game. Have you seen every team play every game this year? Because I watch a lot of basketball, and I haven't done that. But those numbers have seen that. So there is some subjectivity built into really on the fringes of the process. 90% of what happens and who's in and where they're seated and where they play is pretty baked in. So it's only in that last maybe 10% where you get genuine human subjectivity. And as long as you have that, people are going to be mad. They're going to have conspiracy theories. Oh, we should have basketball people on the committee. We should have non-NCAA people on the committee, blah, blah, blah. Win enough games and you don't have to worry about it.
That's my feeling. People clap back at me. Yeah, win more games. Win more games. Then you're not on the bubble. You take it out of their hands. You win enough games. And the other thing about the NCAA tournament, and this is really different from the college football playoff, which is now 12 teams, is that there are 68, and you have these Cinderella teams that are in the tournament. You have Fairleigh Dickinson, which knocked off the top seed in the tournament, Purdue, which went to the national championship the following year. You have UMBC beating the number one seed in Virginia, and then Virginia coming back and winning it all next year. And it's all about the one game. And in the early part of the season, one of these top-ranked teams loses a game to a hyphenated school, and people just look at it, yeah, okay, it's November. Don't worry about it, And so that's why I think this is such a great event, because anything can happen. It's exciting. The games are short. I think that's another factor that makes it different than football. You invest in a football game that becomes a blowout in the second quarter, you got another hour and a half, 2 hours of this stuff. Basketball games are over in less than 2 hours, and then once you get into like tomorrow when there are games going on simultaneously and you have the control of the television, this is such a great thing now. So if you're young, you don't really appreciate this. But that little thing on the top of the screen tells you the score. This is happening on True TV. This is happening on TNT. This is where you want to go. We didn't have that. You were totally at the mercy of the switcher. And I even remember this, and this isn't, to me, at least to me, that long ago. In 2001, Maryland played Georgetown in the Sweet 16. This is a big deal anytime Maryland Georgetown play, but this is Sweet 16. And whoever was responsible for doing the switching had us on another game. And even in this market where everybody was interested in both teams, they didn't go to it like the middle of the first half. You know, they gave you the score, but no. So now that you have this control over that and can watch any game, it's a lot different. So if you're just looking for the best teams, it doesn't work that way. And that's part of the charm of this tournament, that we have the upsets. We have the possibility that anything can happen in a one-game situation. Number 2 from Seth Davis. This is about the last few years of this post-COVID is the effect that the transfer portal has had now that we're 3 years into it.
On balance, it's been very good. I think that I would like to see maybe for the second time transfer, you have to sit out here. That's really what happened. People talk about the portal. The portal is just a database that allows everybody to see who wants to transfer and who doesn't and help you to get in touch. What really happened was it used to be if you transferred, you had to sit out a year, and it was only in like a couple of sports. So they got rid of that. And then they said, oh, okay, on the second transfer, you have to sit out a year, but we're going to have exceptions for hardships. And then everybody's uncle got super sick and they had to, go live near the uncle. And so they ended up getting rid of that. That's part of why, I'm hoping at some point it seems inevitable, Dan, they just make them employees, let them unionize, get a collective bargaining agreement, and maybe it gets rectified that way. But, I see and I understand, like when people will say, oh, these mid-major teams, they have a great player and then he can just transfer up, and that's not fair to the mid-major schools, but they can also get transfers from schools who are in lower divisions. And by the way, a lot of these players start off at those power conference schools and don't get a lot of minutes, and they end up transferring down. So I don't think there's been any change in that regard. The best players are always going to go to the schools with the best resources. And so it's sort of manifesting itself differently, but this is, as far as I'm concerned, it's been that way since the beginning of time.
Well, look at Drake. They took players from Division II to fill out that roster. So you're right. You can go down lower if you need to. Give me 2 or 3 sneaky teams that they may not get to the Final Four, but they're going to create some havoc.
Well, Drake is definitely one of them. Ben McCollum came from D2, won national championships there, brought 4 players. And by the way, UC San Diego is another team. I've got them going to the Sweet 16. Actually, this is their 4th year in Division I, but there's a transition period so it's their first year being eligible for the tournament.
Yeah.
So those are hungry, but a lot of those guys came from Division II as well. What I like about Drake, Dan, and maybe this is someone that all the bracket filler outers can look out for. I do like teams that play a slow tempo because you get these stylistic contrasts. So they're playing Missouri, which likes to get out and go. And basketball better than anyone. It's much easier to take a team that wants to run and slow them down than take a team that wants to play slow and try to speed them up. So St. Mary's is another team that plays a slow tempo. Liberty, they're playing Oregon in the first round. That's my first round upset. I really like High Point as a 13 seed. They won their league last year, lost in the conference tournament, brought a lot of those guys back. They got a guy, Bobby Pettiford, who played at Kansas, now coming off their bench, and they've won all year. They won their league by 3 games. And then McNeese is the other one. Will Wade's got some serious high major athlete. I like High Point because they go 7 feet, 6'8" in the front court, and their 6-man is a stretch 4, 6'9". A lot of times those mid-major teams don't have the size up front that some of the high majors one does. So I like the Panthers of High Point.
Give me the vulnerable number 1 seed.
Well, I think it's Auburn. I mean, I don't think there's any question that they've lost their edge. I think the mantle of being as good as they are, as good as they've been in that league all season. Now, maybe they, rejuvenate themselves. Auburn's an amazing story, Dan, in that all of those guys, they got one guy, a freshman point guard, Tahad Pettiford, comes off the bench. He was a top recruit. Everybody else are Janai Broom is the player of the year, spent his first 2 seasons at Morehead State. I mean, they got guys who transferred from Division II. Chad Baker Mazzara came from junior college. So they need to get that back, like that chip on their shoulder. They're much better, like Seabiscuit, trying to play from behind.
Should there be an age ceiling? That I think the point guard for Creighton is 24. Is that right? I mean, should we get to the point where, maybe 23?
Well, I don't think it should be age. Obviously, I think it should be eligibility. And again, this is why we just need to get to collective bargaining, because the governor of West Virginia, what makes you more popular as a politician or an attorney general, prosecutor than, sticking up for athletes against the NCAA? One thing that is going to happen next year, the whole sport's going to get younger, because this is the last year of the quote unquote COVID senior. Everybody got an extra year of eligibility because of COVID. So you got guys who are playing, and if like you had a medical red shirt, but now like they're trying to make it so, and these judges are helping them out, that the junior college doesn't count against your clock. So you can play 2 years in junior college and now have 5 to play 4 in Division I. That's not going to last.
Well, we'll see. I mean, I can see that being futzed with too. You play 2 years of junior college. The clock starts when you go to a Division I school. You take a redshirt year because they don't necessarily think you're ready to make that step up. And then maybe one of the years you get hurt, well, you wind up staying at that school for 6 years, and then you got your 2 years of junior college. So there you go. That's how you get to be a 24-year-old point guard, and maybe even older. And I forget the player's name, but there was a guy at Georgia Tech in the 80s, and he was from overseas, and he was like 27. Oh, the other thing, like we've seen in football, Chris Wenke won the Heisman Trophy. What was he, 28 years old, because he had played baseball first? You can see that happening too. And there are multi-sport guys that do that. So I don't think this is necessarily over. I think that now that we have the NIL and guys can stay and make money and may not be NBA players, and sometimes it's more lucrative than playing overseas. Yeah, why not? I mean, once you've opened this door, even though you're sort of closing it in that there's no COVID year left, you can still play around with this. So, and this is one of the things I want to ask Gary about, the quality of play. Like, we're seeing teams where the players are now men. They're not boys coming out of high school. They're men. And the average age of the starting lineup of the number one seed in this tournament, Auburn, is over 23 years old. And I don't see that receding that quickly with the amount of NIL money that's being spread around. We got a little coaching news here. Ed DeChellis has announced he's retiring after 14 years at Navy. He coached more games at Navy than any other coach, 426. And he just did a great job there. And I wonder about this, because he replaced Don DeVoe. Don DeVoe, I got to know a little bit. He had been a Bobby Knight assistant. Went on to coach at Tennessee, and then coached at Navy for quite some time. I think he was there more than a decade. And he was asked, would you be interested in getting back to like a level of Tennessee? And he said, when I go to bed at night coaching at Navy, I know my players are going to bed at night too. And that's not the case at every other school. So he stayed until, I don't know whether he was forced out or retired. I don't think he's coaching anymore, but Ed DeChellis took over. And that's the advantage of coaching at Navy, that you've got these guys who are on this strict schedule. They really can't be out late, because you got to get your sleep. It's a rigorous training, and it's something you really have to want to do. I just wonder if what happened in his last game. They were in the Patriot League championship game against AU, and his second leading scorer got thrown out 2 minutes into the game for punching an AU player in the fellas. And I just wonder if, that might have been it for him. I don't know. And also, you got to wonder, too, about, as a coach at Navy, when you're trying to get players in there and the amount of the commitment that it takes. I don't think there's any NIL money at Navy. All these offers, passing up not necessarily lifetime wealth, but quite a bit of money, is the game of recruiting. And that's what drives a lot of these coaches out, is the game of recruiting a lot different than it used to be. But great job by Ed DeChellis, coaching at Navy for 14 years. Coming up, It was 59 years ago today, the game they call Brown versus Board of Education. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
Got Gary Williams coming up at 10:20, and Gary was in Cole Fieldhouse 59 years ago tonight when the all-white Kentucky team lost to Texas Western, which is now the University of Texas El Paso, which had 5 black starters. And that led to a movie that came out in 2006 called Glory Road, where they celebrated this historic game. It was won by the Miners, what they were called. I think maybe even still are called the Miners, 72-65. Pat Riley later played in the NBA, was part of a championship team with the Lakers. Louis Dampier, longtime guard in the ABA, and Larry Conley. They were the 3 stars of Kentucky, and they were called Rupp's Runts. They were small. And Texas Western, which also lost only 1 game all year, they were ranked 3rd in the country. Kentucky was ranked number 1. Frankly, they had a better team. Now, there's been a lot made of it over the years with Riley saying, we were playing to win a basketball game. They were playing for a whole lot more. And maybe that's true. But before this movie came out in 2006, this would have been sometime like in the mid-'90s, Don Haskins, who since passed away, the coach at Texas Western, did an interview with Charles Gibson. And this must have been on Good Morning America, and they were making their road stop in El Paso and talking to Haskins. It might have been the 25th anniversary of this, so was that 1991, something like that. But this was Haskins and his recollections of what happened 59 years ago tonight, and it's a lot different than the way the movie portrays it.
Did you realize at the time that you were pioneering, in effect?
No, I was young, and I didn't think about anything but playing the best players that I had on my team.
I had tickets to that final in College Park, Maryland, and I was aware of it at the time. The press was talking about it. And Coach Rupp from Kentucky said, I remember at the time, no 5 blacks are going to beat Kentucky.
I don't really recall him saying that. I heard that later. And actually, there wasn't a lot made of the black and white thing until after the game. I don't think anybody thought that we would win. And it just happens, and all due respects to those players, but I felt that we could beat them a lot more than they could beat us. Maybe that year we couldn't have beat Kansas every time, and New Mexico. I thought they were real great teams, but Kentucky did not have a large player. Pat Riley, Dampier, and Conley, they were all small.
Right.
And we were a little larger than that team, and of course I guess they probably hadn't played against maybe a black team, but Charlie, out in the West at that time, everybody had black players. New Mexico, right up the road, New Mexico State, Arizona State, Oregon State. It wasn't a big deal, and we didn't play anybody in the South, so it was not that big a deal.
Pat Riley, you mentioned, of course, now coach of the New York Knicks. Did you get mail after that? I gather you did.
I got a lot of mail.
Hate mail. Hate mail?
I got mail. I think it opened my eyes. I had no idea that it was like that. In this part of the country, it wasn't.
I know you had a 25th reunion of the team recently. Did you talk at all about the fact that how that team really may have changed basketball?
I think it was the first time that I had ever talked to them because it took a few years, like the Southwest Conference, no black players, and about 3 or 4 years later, I'm looking in the paper and they got their first team. All-conference team is all black.
Yeah, so it did change somewhat quickly. For example, James Brown, the great James Brown, who you see on CBS now, he was one of the top 5 players in the country at DeMatha in 1969. And Texas wanted him to be the first black player in the Southwest Conference. And he actually was more interested in going to North Carolina. And as he tells it, Morgan Wooten, his coach, said that's fine, but don't go down there and commit. Wait till you get back home. And once he got back home, Senator Ted Kennedy he decided that, hey, let's make a run at him for Harvard. So he took James and his mom out to lunch in the Senate building, and his mom, who had never seen him play, didn't really know anything about sports, said, "Oh, Harvard wants you, and Ted Kennedy is telling you to go there. That's where you're going to go, son." And that's where he went. He was a great player there, was drafted by the Hawks, and was, I believe, the last player cut, and somehow has managed to carve out a pretty good career. Anyway, that's the Haskins Haskins recollection of what that was. And in 1966, again, no big deal. Just to back this up, Dave Kindred, great columnist, worked for the Washington Post for a while, later for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. He's written a bunch of books. He went to work the following season, so this would be the 66-67 season, at the Lexington Herald. And his beat was Kentucky basketball, covering Adolph Rupp. And so this is, only a few months removed from what happened in College Park on this night 59 years ago. And as Dave puts it, again, at that point, 59 years ago, not that big a deal.
I don't think it was even an issue that season. I think I've done a lot of research on Rupp as a racist. I don't believe that. I think that was completely unfair, that charge. But at the time, Sports Illustrated, Frank DeFord, in fact, covered that game, the 65-66 game.
Mm-hmm.
He did not mention, there was no mention of white against black. The only writer, was one writer at the game who mentioned it. I think it was Bill Conlon from Philadelphia, made an issue out of it. Otherwise, there was no issue made of it at the time, but it did change college basketball in that more universities began recruiting more black players. That's why that was the main impact of that game. And so the idea that it was historic in the terms of a racial impact was layered onto it later over the years when people looked back and said, "Oh, well, is that where it started?" Okay, well, it was a convenient start. When in fact Cincinnati had won the NCAA 3 years before with 4 black starters. Texas Western normally had 4 black starters, but through some confluence of injury and a decision, a whim, Don Haskins started 5 blacks against Rupp. So I think that it became a convenient kind of jumping off point for a racial story.
Right.
But I knew none of it. And some of it, I attribute my ignorance to being 26 years old, suddenly covering one of the storied basketball teams of programs of all time. I was probably in over my head. I didn't recognize the racial impact of anything. Illinois Wesleyan, Martin Luther King spoke at Illinois Wesleyan my junior year. I learned about that last year.
Wow.
I didn't even know it at the time. It's how blank I was.
Yeah, so the historical lens on the 66 championship game kind of came much later, it sounds like.
Yes. I had, as I said, Sports Illustrated didn't mention a racial angle. Almost no one did. I have interviewed every one of those Kentucky players. None of them saw it as a game of blacks against whites. They all saw it just as a basketball game.
Mm-hmm.
And the Texas Western people did too. I spoke to them later. I did a piece for Sports Illustrated on the game, and I talked to David Lattin, who was their big star. Talked to another one of the, I don't remember his name, the guard guy that made a couple of great plays in the game. They didn't see it as black against white at all.
So Bobby Joe Hill was the leading scorer in that game. He had 20 points, and Lattin, as they called him Big Daddy Lattin, he had 16 points and 8 rebounds. And, Texas Western won the battle of the boards, not by much, 35-33. Kentucky did not shoot well. They shot 27 of 70. That's 38%, and Texas Western was a little bit better. The other part of this, it's a couple things that are also fascinating about this. Number one, Kentucky could have had a black player and could have had a great, great player named Wes Unseld. And Adolph Rupp had tried to get Unseld coming out of high school, which would have been 1964. And as great a man as Wes was, and a powerful man, and able to probably take on anybody, both physically and emotionally, mentally, the whole thing. He was young, and he decided, I don't want the pressure of being a trailblazer like that. So he stayed closer to home. He went to Louisville, which had black players, and he went to play there. Had he gone to Kentucky, there's no story there. And Kentucky probably wins that game because Wes was a great rebounder and a scorer in college. And if you had 4 white starters with Wes Unseld on Kentucky, I think they would have beaten Texas Western. But they didn't. They had a white team. And Texas Western was better, bigger, and they won the game. And it's just interesting to look back now and see what it meant at the time versus what it means now. And you say Texas Western 1966 to anybody who's of age, well, they know the historical significance of it. But it picked up significance along the way. Like when Martin Luther King delivered his I Have a Dream speech in 1963 down on the Mall, that was historic. People knew it at the time. This, a few years later, not the same, and over the years it has picked up that kind of significance. The last thing I want to mention about this game, and this just goes to show you the incredible change with television. Now we have every single game that's available. If you want to watch an entire game, you can. And so I don't know what it adds up to, but 68 teams playing 3 weeks of this. It's endless hours of television. I don't think any of the other games in the tournament were televised. And this game, there was no national broadcast of this. This was syndicated. Like, the stations could pick it up. Some did. Some ran it on tape delay. And the game started at 10 o'clock at night. And the reason it started at 10 o'clock at night, until 1981, they used to have a third-place game. That's right. The teams that would lose in the semifinal games, now they hightail it out of town. The 2 teams that lose on Saturday, they're gone. They're not around for the rest of the weekend. The 2 teams that win, they have practice and news conferences on Sunday, and then they play on Monday night. But in those days, they would play the third-place game. So I guess it started 7:30, and Duke and Utah played. Duke won. And so because of that, with the time you need for the teams to warm up, let's say it ended at 9:30, you needed a half an hour to warm up. And so they didn't even tip this game until 10 o'clock, and there was no national TV for it. I don't even know, and maybe they weren't even allowed to because of blackout rules. I don't even know if it was televised in this market. If it would have been, it probably would have been on Channel 5. I don't even think they had Channel 20 yet. I'm not sure about that. But we had 3 channels, 3 network channels and Channel 5, and that's it. And now it is the biggest thing going. Of course, it doesn't tip that much earlier now. It's still, after 9 o'clock because of all the hoo-ha that goes along with it. But just to think of the major change in television, and as I say, I think the biggest step forward for it was 1973 when NBC decided to put it on prime time on Monday night. Bill Walton had 44 points, shot 21 of 22 in a win over Memphis State, and that's when people really turned on, I think, to college basketball. But the year before, Saturday afternoon, UCLA beat Florida State. And the first one I remember watching was Howard Porter and Villanova playing UCLA in 1971 in the bridge between Lou Alcindor and Bill Walton. UCLA won with Steve Patterson having a big game. And then later, and this is another change in college basketball, Villanova had to vacate the runner-up spot because I don't even know if he took money, but Howard Porter had signed with an agent prior to that game, and that was an NCAA violation. My, how things have changed. Coming up, we'll talk to Gary about that and other things, and also Orioles preview as we launch that. The season gets underway next week. We'll talk about the season and what's ahead. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
It is always great to talk to Hall of Fame coach Gary Williams. He will be part of an event tomorrow at Hollywood Casino at Charlestown at the ESPN Bet Sportsbook, as he will be watching March Madness. It's only about an hour from D.C., and they've got big screens there, 250-inch LED screen, and 40 televisions throughout, so you'll have no problem watching any of the games. You would not know it to look at Gary, but he recently turned 80 years old. Belated happy birthday, Gary, and good to talk to you again. I was wondering about this. Do you remember the first NCAA tournament game that you ever watched?
Yeah, I think so. It was delayed TV. It was UCLA before they had Lou Alcindor. It was the small team with Gail Goodrich, Walt Hazard, Slaughter, Erickson, Kenny Washington. And I was like a junior in high school. And it was on like 11 o'clock at night on a Friday night or Saturday night, delayed. And that was the first one.
Yeah, I mean, my first one that I remember was 71 when UCLA, between Alcindor and Walton, had Steve Patterson, and they played Villanova with Howard Porter. And and that was a Saturday afternoon. And the following year, UCLA won again on a Saturday afternoon. And I've always felt that the college basketball game took a huge step forward with the game in 73 where Walton had the 44 points and they put it in prime time. That, to me, was when it jumped forward. Do you feel the same way?
Yeah, I thought that was big. I was there at that game, by the way. Walton was unbelievable. The one he missed rimmed out. I mean, it could have gone. And like it was incredible. But the other game I always felt was and this is later. This is the 70. I guess it was 79 Magic and Bird.
Yep. And
that's when I think administrators, presidents of universities believed that you could make money off of college basketball. That's when that really, because that game had the highest rating of any game that had been played before that.
Yeah, no question about that. And I think to this day, it's maybe not the most watched, but it is the highest rating. And it was perfect for the NBA because they ushered those two guys in, and the NBA benefited from it as well. So that was really, really remarkable. I was talking in the last hour, and I know you've talked about being there over the years. You were a player at Maryland at the time, and the Texas Western win over the all-white Kentucky team, which was 59 years ago. Tonight, and I had some tape from the late Don Haskins and also Dave Kindred, longtime sports writers, and they said at the time this was not seen as a huge deal. And he even said, like, Frank DeFord wrote the story in Sports Illustrated and never mentioned the racial aspect of it. You were there that night. How did you feel it at that time?
No. I didn't feel it personally. I being from New Jersey, you played high school games that were integrated all the time. You went into Camden, which was, had some of the great high school basketball teams in the history of New Jersey to play against that competition. So that wasn't a big deal to me. And Billy Jones, the first African-American player in the ACC, was my teammate at Maryland. So, we had gone through some things with Billy, but basically going that night to the game. And the interesting thing that I found out later, I didn't know, was that Texas Western during the year, Haskins was an old-time coach. So back then, coaches weren't worried about getting players upset or making them mad or anything like that, or worried about them transferring. He would start whatever team he thought was the best team to match up against the team they were playing against. Against Kentucky, he felt that his best team was the five guys he put on the floor, which happened to be five African-American players. But he had started games during the year where there were white players in his starting lineup. And I think that got overlooked, and I as time went by, I thought more about that game. And the movie they made on a Glory Road, it wasn't bad, but, they had people waving rebel flags in the stands, which never happened. That didn't happen.
Yeah, they took the license, sure.
But there were articles written back then where you could kind of get the feeling that Kentucky was a lot smarter than Texas Western. Their guys did this, their guys did that. They studied harder. All those things that got kind of thrown out there during that time. But I'll never forget that the guy on the back door of Cole Fieldhouse back then, where the Final Four was played, was the same guy that worked there when we played, so he let us all in. We got in for free at the Final Four.
Yeah, well, now it might cost you like $600 or $700, but yeah,
things are now the school would go on probation for 4 years.
Yeah, right. Well, not anymore because cheating ain't cheating anymore.
No, that's true.
But
that's true.
Here's another thing, and you mentioned the television. No national TV for that game, and some stations ran it on delay. And the other thing was that I think it was till 1981 that they had a third place game. So Duke and Utah played, and that game didn't tip until 10 o'clock. Not a big deal for college students in those days, but yeah.
You know who the best player in the tournament was a guy named Jerry Chambers for Utah.
Yeah.
He went in averaging like 30 points a game. I think he was from the D.C. area. And it was the first time I ever saw him play. He was just by far the best player on the 4 teams in the tournament.
Yeah, I mean that's the famous one. Bill Bradley, I think he still holds the record for an NCAA tournament game, but it was one of those third place games, which they eventually did away with. We're talking to Gary Williams, Hall of Fame coach. He's a part of an event coming up tomorrow at Hollywood Casino at Charlestown. I'm sure you've thought about this. You've probably been asked about it a million times. The state of the game today, where it's a lot closer to professional basketball, and in fact is professional basketball. Have you thought about how you would coach in today's game?
Yeah, I have. I've had to think about it because people,
ask you all the time. Yeah,
you think you could coach in today's game, and you'd have to adjust. There's no doubt about it. You look at Izzo; he's made adjustments. Some guys like Larinaga, Boeheim, Krzyzewski have left, and I think that was a big part of their decision to leave. But they were also old. You get old, and it's not a great job when you're old. So that's all there. But the thing is, you have to accept that it's professional sport. As a coach, you have to accept the fact that you're going to have to put money together. I just read an article on Rick Pitino. He's got $4 million to work with, and then one of the guys is a big billionaire up there from Wall Street that really helps out. And so you have to get those people into your program, and the school's got to make the commitment that they're going to have competitive money, because you're not going to win if you can't get players as good as the other teams in your league. You're not going to win games. So you have to make that commitment. But coaches are making a lot more money now than when I was coaching. I wasn't poor by any means, but today, $4 or $5 million is not unusual for a power conference basketball coach.
Yeah, that and everybody benefits. Although, if you were coaching Cooper Flagg, he'd be making twice as much money as what you just mentioned there. Because
and that's the thing. You if you want to get a Cooper Flagg, you got to go over $1 million to get a player at that level for 1 year, for 6 months. That's
right.
What you have to pay. And you have to accept that. You can't say, well, I don't really believe in that, so I'm not going to do it. Well, then you're not going to win, because you're not going to beat a Cooper Flagg if you don't have talent at least close to that. So you make that commitment as a coach, and I think the younger coaches, you grew up with it. You can handle it. You can do it. So I hate to see it, because the academic side of things is completely gone. A player can transfer 4 times and play at 4 different schools if he wants to. And every time you transfer, you lose credits toward graduation. So, it's the academic side is just, it's gone, basically, in terms of football and basketball at the major conference level.
Yeah. No, I'm sure you heard the Steve Alford rant over the weekend. And he brought up APR, which is academic progress rate. Gary, I hadn't heard that term in 10 years, right?
I haven't heard that term since Steve Blake, since Chris Wilcox left early after we won a national championship, and Steve Blake didn't, finish his degree at that point and all that, and a big deal was made out of that. And now you don't even. Nobody even talks about graduation rates or anything like that. I mean, that's not part of the college process anymore, really. Hey, and you go to a home visit. This is even better. When I went to a home visit 20 years ago, you better be ready with how your players graduated, what their majors were, all those things, because parents would ask those questions right away. Now you walk into a home visit and you get one question.
Yeah.
How much are you going to pay my son?
Right.
And that's it.
Yeah.
That's
no.
it.
That's what Alfred said. He said, that's the only question I get. You know, they don't even
right.
Yeah.
He's right.
Crazy. In that vein, though, there is, I guess, maybe a positive side, or maybe you look at it this as a negative side, because one of your great strengths was developing players. You were a great teacher of the game. A guy like Gravis Vasquez made enormous improvement over his 4 years with you. Now you're getting ready-made players, like the number one seed, Auburn. The average age of the starting lineup is over 23 years old. I think of your championship team in 2022. Of your top 6, I believe 3 were seniors, 2 were juniors, and 2 of the seniors were fifth-year guys. So it's kind of come full circle on that, but it's a lot different. How do you look at it now versus the team that you had then?
Well, coaches, Rick Pitino, in fact, has been quoted as saying he's probably recruited as the last high school recruit.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, I would rather have a guy 22 years old that's averaged 12 points a game, say at a mid-major level, than get a kid out of high school, unless he's a Cooper Flag, of course, somebody that,
right.
There's 2 or 3 of them every year. But he says, hey, I'll take the kid with experience playing in college over a high school player any time. And, he's right, because you're only going to have him for a year probably if he's good, or your team is successful. They're going to get bigger offers. You have to match that offer. That whole thing happens. And, it's amazing how the age thing has become a part of college basketball. It used to be if you had a great freshman class, you'd have them for 3-4 years, and you develop them, and hopefully they stay together, and everything would really work out to a great basketball team after 3-4 years. But nowadays, you can't count on that. You can't count on a player being there for more than 1 year if he's a good player.
Mm-hmm. But also in judging talent, when you scout high school players, your eye is trained, certainly, but there's a big difference from a guy that plays at a public school versus a DeMatha or a Gonzaga. If you're looking at college players in the transfer portal, right, you have a better understanding of how they match up with top talent, don't you?
Sure. And, there's so much video available now. You really don't have to go on the road recruiting as much as you did before, because you have all these videos of guys in game situations, and probably more organized than you would see in the summertime, in an AAU game or whatever. So you get a more realistic look at players now. But you see some teams make mistakes. In other words, they have incredible amount of NIL money available, and they give it to players, and all of a sudden those guys can't play together. They don't like each other, whatever happens. So you're seeing that. Miami was a good example of that. I think that really pushed Jim Larrañaga out. He did all the right things in terms of the NIL and all that, but all of a sudden they couldn't play. And it was not because of talent. It was because they just didn't like each other, and that can happen.
Yeah, and then also, I got to think that every year now, you're developing a brand new team. The team that you brought back to win the championship, would you lose one player off the Final Four team the year before, one starter, right?
Yeah, we lost Danny Miller transferred to Notre Dame, and Terrence Morris went to the NBA.
Yeah.
2 good players, but we had Byron Mouton, who was sitting out that year transferring from Tulane, so he kind of took their spot.
Right.
And, we kept on moving. But, it's just, you look at Maryland this year, I think Kevin Willard's done a tremendous job, because there's one player on that team that plays a lot from last year.
Yeah.
And that's Reese.
Right.
Everybody else is new.
Brand new.
And to put that together, and they play really well together. I mean, we've all seen the games this year, and I think when they're shooting well, they can play with anybody.
Yeah. We're talking to Gary Williams. I wanted to ask you about something that we talked about yesterday, that Kevin Willard was on a CBS interview that included Roy Hibbert, and Hibbert said that he was asked to help to recruit Derek Queen. And Kevin said, hey, you're never going to get a guy to Baltimore to go to Georgetown. And I thought of the ice breaking that you had back when you got Keith Booth. There was something, and I think it was related to Ernie Graham, as I understand it, that the word was out that you shouldn't go to Maryland if you were from Baltimore. Did you find that to be some wall that you had to break down to get a great player like Booth?
Yes. there was definitely a feeling about Ernie Graham and about the University of Maryland in general. I spoke to a group of people up in Baltimore my first year, and they, the one gentleman afterwards, we took questions, and the gentleman asked why Thurgood Marshall was turned down for law school at the University of Maryland. And any school back then, any school south of the Mason-Dixon line only took white, applicants into their school, into law school. And so we got lumped in as a school that, in Baltimore, I think always looks at D.C. as, we get considered to be Washington, D.C. at Maryland from Baltimore, and from Washington, D.C., I feel a lot of times we're considered a Baltimore school. So you kind of get both sides of that in recruiting. But I think that's true what Willard said. We're at a point now where the University of Maryland, they're in a position where they can recruit, guys out of Baltimore and get those kids to come there because of the success of Reese. In other words, Reese has really developed in his 4 years at Maryland, and everything's current, and people look at that and they say, well, if the kid goes to Maryland, he's got a pretty good chance to be successful. So I think that's where Willard's coming from, and I like the attitude. Why should Georgetown be able to beat Maryland on a kid from Baltimore?
Yeah, no, I think that he, like you, has a chip on his shoulder, which has benefited him. I wonder about this too. That you got Auburn going in as the number one seed, and they've lost 3 of their last 4 or something like that. And your team that won the championship, you were also the number one seed. But you had early season losses, and you did lose in the ACC tournament, but the team really picked up steam. Did you feel like you were going into it, right on top? And how do you look at Auburn now, having maybe not faded down the stretch because they played good teams, but not winning as many games as they were in the middle of the year?
Well, I think we lost to Arizona the first game of the year in Madison Square Garden. That was a wake-up call for us. And Arizona had had lost to Duke. They were in the Final Four with us, and they lost in a championship game to Duke the year before. So they were really good, a very good team. We lost at Oklahoma with Kelvin Sampson out there in a game that was my fault because we had pressure it was CBS. They pressured us to play that game, even though we were coming right out of exams. And back then, you did take exams legitimately, which, a little different now.
A little different now,
But we lost. And then we lost to Duke at Duke, and we went 15-1 in the ACC. That was our one loss. And then we lost to NC State in the conference tournament in the second round, which probably was to our benefit long term because it gave us more time to rest getting ready for the NCAA tournament.
And then you rolled.
So I think that we're 32-4 for the year. Auburn's situation, unbelievable league this year. Obviously, the strongest league in the country, and I think they got tired. I think they got a little tired. That mental thing you have to get ready to play every game at a high level in that league. There was no shortcuts. So I think this time will really help Auburn. In other words, they've had a few days off to regroup and everything, and they're really good. And Bruce Pearl, they play hard and they have a great player. So I think they're a legitimate number one seed. I really believe that Duke and Florida right now are 2 other number one seeds are playing better than Auburn.
Okay, so because Tony used to do a column every year where he'd call Boeheim to pick the national champion. Are you choosing between those two, Duke and Florida?
Yeah, I would say that might be, but I also think a team like Maryland, who would play Florida, I guess, in the Sweet 16, both teams are very similar in that they have 2 really good inside players and 3 perimeter players that can really shoot it, handle the ball, that type of thing. And Florida might have a little more depth than Maryland, although Maryland's depth is underrated. I hear everybody talking about, the Crab Five and all that. And that's fine. But at the same time, if you have a bench, the best thing about a bench is if they can come in, play good defense, rebound, and keep the score where it is until your best guys get back onto the floor. They don't have to go score 20 points or anything like that. And people always look at the scoring on Maryland, but a kid like Geronimo comes in, plays really tough, hard defense, good athlete, can go get the ball for you. And that's what you need. You need guys like that because you don't have 10 starters on your team. You never do. And, you need a couple guys coming off the bench that can play. And that doesn't mean they have to be big scorers.
Last thing, you got a former player coaching tonight in the NCAA tournament for the first time, Dwayne Simpkins, getting his head coaching start, same place you did, American. Has he called you about this? And what would you tell him if he did?
Well, Dwayne and I talked once in a while during the season, and I think he's done a great job. It's only his second year, and he's got he won the Patriot League, or tied, I guess, for the Patriot League. To do that in your second year is tremendous. Plus, he got the crowd back to American U. They drew well their last few games, which is great to see. And Dwayne paid his dues. I think he was an assistant coach for 12 years or whatever, and he's worked very hard at the game. And he does a great job. He's a lot calmer than I am on the sideline. I noticed that. I asked him why he didn't yell at his players like I used to yell at him when he played for me.
And what did he say?
He said, I didn't like it when he yelled at me, so I figure I better not yell at my guys.
Got it. Yeah, well, that makes sense. Gary, always great to talk to you. Anybody wants to see Gary tomorrow, he will be at Hollywood Casino at Charlestown Races. Be there at the ESPN Bet Sportsbook, and plenty of TVs to watch. And I guess unlike the old days that we talked about, nothing on tape delay and big screens to watch it. So enjoy out there.
Thanks, Andy. I appreciate it.
Good to talk to you. That's Gary Williams. And again, you can see him tomorrow at Charlestown Races. Coming up, we'll get to Orioles preview. They're about to launch the season. We'll talk about what's ahead. It's the Andy Poland Show, ESPN 630.